The other day I was reading this book and I came across this word.
Mhm.
It was mellifluous. And it sounded so beautiful, but I had absolutely no idea what it meant.
Yeah,
So, of course, I had to look it up. You know me.
of course. Yeah.
But then it got me thinking, like, words are just, there's so much more than just their dictionary definitions, right?
100%. Yeah. They're these little, I don't know, capsules of like history and culture and even emotion.
That's exactly it. And it's like sometimes when you kind of peel back those layers, like it totally changes how you understand the word?
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing in today's deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be looking at these four words and phrases. Well, they sound simple at least. Quintessential, take up, call the shots, and hobnob.
Yeah.
But we'll see. There's often way more to them than you might think. What's interesting to me is how these words, they have these kind of sometimes surprising backstories,
Yeah.
but we still use them like every day to mean such specific things.
Yeah. That's true.
So let's jump right in. Let's start with quintessential. It's one of those words that always sounds so, I don't know, kind of elegant,
Mm-hmm.
almost academic.
Right.
But what does it really even mean, and where does it come from?
So when you say something is quintessential, you're basically saying it's like the most perfect example of its type,
Okay.
the most typical example. Like if you could only choose one image to represent, say, like all of Italy,
Okay.
what would you choose?
Oh, that's tough. Maybe the Leaning Tower of Pisa?
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. You could say that it's quintessentially Italian.
Okay, I see. So it's not just about being like a common example, but it's more about like really capturing the essence of something.
Exactly. You got it. And the word's origin, actually, it reflects that. It comes from the Latin quintessentia, which means fifth essence.
Fifth essence. Wait, hold on. Are there like four other essences?
So back in the day, like ancient times, people thought that everything in the world was made up of four elements: earth, water, air, and
Yeah.
fire.
Right.
But then they thought there was also a fifth element. This one was like even purer, and they called it quintessence. They thought this quintessence was like the fundamental essence that made up, well, everything.
Okay. I'm starting to see where this is going. So quintessential. It's like the VIP of essences, I guess. Like the one that's even better than the best.
Huh, exactly. And you can see how that idea, of like a supreme, the ultimate essence, how that kind of evolved into how we use quintessential today. And honestly, I think it's amazing, even words that we use for like really common things, everyday things, they have these like crazy journeys through history.
Totally. I'm with you there.
And I think like when we know these stories, when we know where these words come from, we can appreciate how much richness is like hidden in our language.
It's true. It's like finding a hidden room in an old house. So, okay, for our listeners out there who want to add a little, I don't know, a little sophistication to their vocabulary, are there any other ways to say quintessential, besides just saying quintessential?
Yeah, for sure. You could use ideal, exemplary, classic, even archetypal works sometimes. They all kind of give you that same feeling, being the best possible example, like the most representative.
I like it. Okay, so we've done quintessential. Moving on, let's take up. It's a phrase that, well, it sounds pretty straightforward, but
It's actually pretty sneaky.
it is. What's the deal with take up?
Well, for one thing, it's a great example of what we call a phrasal verb. And those are, well, they can be tricky. Phrasal verbs are those combinations, with a verb and a preposition, like take up.
Yeah, and they're like little puzzles because putting the pieces together, it doesn't always give you the full picture.
Tell me about it. And it can be tough to learn for exactly that reason, but they're great for adding nuance to how you express something. They're very common.
For sure. So what are some of the ways that we can, well, take up things?
Well, you can take up a new hobby,
Yeah.
for one, like she decided to take up photography.
Right.
Or it can be about actual physical space, like that piano takes up half the living room.
Yeah. So true. So it's like you were saying the meaning of the whole phrase. You really can't always guess it from the individual words.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
But honestly,
Yeah.
that's part of what makes them so powerful, I think.
Yeah.
Two little words, and you could do so much with them.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Okay, so to really make sure we're giving our listeners all the tools they need, what are some other ways we could say take up? Depending on what we're talking about.
Right. So if we're talking about hobbies, you could say engage in or adopt or even just plain old begin.
Okay.
But if we're talking about space, you might say something like occupy or fill.
It's like having a whole, like a toolkit filled with different words. I love it. All right, moving on from hobbies and living rooms. Let's talk about a phrase that it screams authority. You ready? Call the shots.
Ooh, I like that one.
Right. I don't know about you, but I always picture like a movie director on a film set.
Yeah, yeah. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely makes you think of someone, well, someone in charge.
Yes. So to call the shots means you're the one in control. You're the one who gets to make the decisions.
Right. Like imagine a CEO, announcing like some big merger. They're the one calling the shots.
They are. But where does a phrase like that even come from? Because I have to admit, when I saw it on our list for today, I was like, I have no idea.
Right. It's so visual, And you're right to think about someone assertive, someone really taking charge, because it probably comes from the military.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Or, well, maybe sports,
Okay.
specifically like target shooting.
Ah, okay.
So picture this. You got this marksman,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like super focused. And before they fire, they call out their target.
Oh, okay.
And that's kind of like them calling the shots. Rena.
That makes so much sense. I
Yeah.
never would have guessed. It's so interesting how these phrases develop.
Yeah.
It adds a whole other layer to them. Okay. So, call the shots, it's about making decisions. But it's not just any decisions, it's about doing it with this confidence.
Yes.
It's like assertiveness. So, for our listeners, especially anyone in a leadership role, how else could they project that same kind of authority aside from literally saying, I'm calling the shots here?
Right. Well, instead of saying call the shots, you could say something like take charge
Okay.
or direct or how about assume command?
Yeah.
They all get that point across, about strong leadership, about being decisive.
Very core. And that wraps up call the shots.
Oh.
But we've got one more word on our list for today. And this one feels a little more, how should I put it? Social, maybe?
Ooh, which one is that?
Hobnobbing.
Ah, yes. Hobnobbing. It's funny, right? You hear that word and you picture those like cocktail parties.
Yes.
You picture those fancy gatherings.
It sounds, I don't know, kind of sophisticated, like you need a fancy hat or something.
Yeah, it does.
But I have a feeling that it might have, well, kind of humble beginnings, maybe. Am I right?
You are so right, actually. Hobnob, believe it or not, comes from 18th century Old English.
What?
Yeah. And it comes from this phrase, haben and nebon, meaning to have and have not.
To have and have not. Wait, how did we go from to have and have not
Yeah.
to like fancy parties and mingling with the elite?
So it seems like back then it was all about sharing a drink.
Okay.
Maybe like with someone who had more to offer,
Yeah.
And somehow over time it changed.
Interesting.
It became about socializing in general. But yeah, often with this idea of like moving up in the world.
Wow. So hobnobbing went from casual drinks to like rubbing elbows with the upper crust.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's funny, right?
It really is. And it just goes to show you language is always changing.
Always.
It reflects like who we are and how we live and I don't know, how we want to be seen, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a linguistic time capsule.
I like that.
So for our listeners, if they ever stumble across hobnob, maybe in a book or something, or if they just want to, I don't know, spice up their vocabulary a little at their next social event, what are some other ways they could say it?
Oh, there are tons. Let's see. Instead of hobnob, you could say mingle. You can say socialize, or how about fraternize?
Ooh, fraternize. I like that one.
Right. And if you really want to emphasize, that idea of making connections with like influential people, you could even say network.
Network. Nice. Very strategic. I like it. It's funny because we've been like digging into these words and where they come from. And I don't know, it makes me realize that language, it's not just about like communicating information,
Tell me about it.
It's a way bigger deal than that. It's like it's part of who we are.
100%. It's our history, our values.
It's true. It's like each word is carrying around like a little piece of, I don't know, the human experience or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more we understand those connections, I think, the richer our own understanding of language becomes, and the more we can do with it.
I totally agree. So, okay, let's recap. We've talked about the quintessential essence of perfection. We talked about take up and all its weird little quirks, and we saw how call the shots is way more assertive than you might think. Oh, and then there's hobnobbing, which, let's face it, has the most surprising backstory of all.
Definitely not what you'd expect.
Not even close. And what's amazing to me is each of these words, they're like, a tiny little window into this whole, like, crazy complex world of the English language.
And the best part is it's always changing. There's always something new to discover.
That's so true. It never gets boring, does it?
Never. Speaking of which, have you ever noticed how some words, they just make you think of, like really specific images?
Oh, all the time. It's like our brains are wired to connect those things, like words with images or sounds or even just like feelings.
Yeah.
And sometimes all it takes is like one perfectly chosen word and it's like you're transported somewhere else entirely.
That's the power of language, right?
It is. That's what makes writing so powerful. And storytelling, it's all about those connections.
Yeah. If you really want to draw people in, that's how you do it. Use words that make them feel something.
Exactly. So for our listeners out there who, want to be better with words, whether it's writing, talking, or even just like thinking, what advice would you give them? So for our listeners out there who, want to be better with words, whether it's writing, talking, or even just like thinking, what advice would you give them?
Honestly, I'd say just be curious.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just accept words like at face value.
Right.
Really think about them. Look a little deeper. Like, where do they come from?
Okay.
What are the different shades of meaning?
Mm-hmm.
You might be surprised by like what you find.
Mm-hmm. It's like becoming like a word detective.
Yes.
Just you're looking for clues and making connections.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's like this whole world of language just opens up.
And the more you learn, the better you get at, well, everything. Writing, having a conversation,
Yeah.
even just thinking to yourself.
Because you can say so much more.
Exactly. When you really know your way around,
Yeah.
you can pick just the right word to like really paint a picture for someone.
It's like you're unlocking a secret code.
Yes. A secret code of this whole world of communication.
And the best part is, like, you're never really done, right?
Never. There are always new words to discover, new things to learn. It never gets old.
That's so true. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up our deep dive for today.
Sounds good to me.
But for our listeners, don't put those dictionaries away just yet. Keep those minds open and never forget, every word has a story to tell.